warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam
Wabarakatuh.
warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Respectfully, I would like to greet Mr. Dr. Abdul Shahid MPD as the lecturer of the English-Indonesian translation course and my dear friends participants of today's discussion. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Muhammad Ali Raihan Ramadan and I will be the moderator who guides this discussion today. Alhamdulillah, today we can conduct our English-Indonesian translation discussion online. Hopefully, this discussion will run smoothly from the beginning until the end. The agenda of today's discussion is as follows. First, opening. Second, material presentation by group 3. Third, question and answer session and discussion. And the last one is closing. Before we begin the main session, let us open this meeting by reciting Basmalah together. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
Next, we will move to the presentation session. To group 3, please present your book review. The time is yours.
Okay, thank you so much for moderator today. Our group will be present the book with the title Teknik dan Ideologi Penerjemah Bahasa Inggris, Teori dan Praktik oleh Febri Prandika Putra, M. Hum. So let's move to the chapter 1. This chapter focuses on the basic understanding of what translation is and what a translator needs in order to produce a good translation. First, the book defines translation as a transfer of meaning, not words. This definition shows that translation is not a mechanical activity of replacing words from one language into another language. Instead, the translators must focus on conveying the message and meaning of the source text into the target language. This is important because languages have different structures, vocabularies, and cultural backgrounds. If a translator only translates word by word, the result may be inaccurate or unnatural. The book also explains that translation involves a process with 3 main stages. The first stage is analysis. In the analysis stage, the translator carefully studies the source text. This includes understanding the grammatical structure, the vocabulary, the context, and the cultural meaning of the text. At this stage, the translator must identify difficult words, idioms, and expressions. The translator also needs to understand the intention of the author and the purpose of the text. Without proper analysis, the translator may misunderstand the message, which will affect the quality of the translations. And the second stage is transfer. In the transfer stage, the translator moves the meaning from the source language into the target language. This doesn't mean copying the structure, but transferring the message. The translator selects equivalent words and expressions that can best represent the original meaning. This stage requires linguistic knowledge and good judgment in choosing appropriate terms. The transfer stage is where meaning is reshaped from one language system into another language system. The third is restructuring. In the restructuring stage, the translator reorganizes the text into a natural form in the target language. The sentence structure is adjusted so that it sounds fluent and normal to the target readers. This stage ensures that the translation is not awkward or confusing, and the translator must make sure that the result have to sound like an original text in the target language. So the translation process is analysis, transfer, and restructuring. Next is the books explain the characteristic of a good translation. A good translation must have three important qualities. There is accuracy, which means that the meaning of the source text is transferred correctly into the target language. There should be no distortion or loss of meaning. The translator must avoid adding or removing information that does not exist in the source text. Second is clarity. That means the translation is easy to understand. The readers should not feel confused when reading the translated text. Clear translation uses appropriate vocabulary and simple structure when possible. Third is naturalness. Naturalness means that the translation sounds natural in the target language. It should not sound like a translation, but like an original text written in a target language. This requires the translator to follow the grammar and style of the target language. Then, the chapter 1 also discusses the competencies required of a translator. A translator needs two main types of competence: linguistic competence and cultural competence. For linguistic competence refers to the ability to master both the source language and the target language. The translator must understand grammar, vocabulary, and sentence patterns in both languages. And for cultural competence, refers to understanding the culture behind the language. Culture influences how people express ideas, emotions, and values. Without cultural competence, the translator may misinterpret meaning or produce inappropriate translations. Therefore, Chapter 1 emphasizes that translation is meaning-based, process-oriented, and competence-driven. Let's move to the Chapter 2. In Chapter 2, explains how translation is actually done in practice. It focuses on translation methods, translation procedures, and challenges in translations. Let's talk about the translation methods first. So, in the book, there are 5 translation methods. The first one is word for word translation. In this method, we translate each word directly from the source language into the target language. It follows the original word order and structure. This method is usually used for learning or analyzing grammar, but not suitable for producing natural translations. And the second method is literal translations. In the literal translations, it follows the source text structure but adapts it slightly to the target language grammar. It is more flexible than word for word translation, but still close to the original form. Third, faithful translation. Faithful translation tries to preserve the exact meaning and style of the original text as much as possible. The translator respects the source text and doesn't change the message. And the fourth is semantic translation. Semantic translation focuses more on meaning and nuance rather than rigid structure. It allows more flexibility in expressing the message while keeping the original sense. And the last one is communicative translation, which prioritizes the reader's understanding. The translator adapts the text so that it is easy and natural for the target readers. This method focuses on effectiveness of communication. And then there is translation procedures. The book also explains several procedures used in translation. First, borrowing. Borrowing means taking words directly from the source language without translation. This is common for technical terms or cultural words. And there is calque. Calque is a literal translation or of a phrase or expression while keeping the structure of the source language. And there is transposition. Transposition means changing grammatical categories. For example, a noun in the source language may be a verb in the target language. Modulation. Modulation changes the point of view or perspective of the sentence while keeping the meaning. And there is adaptation. which adjusts cultural elements to fit the target culture. This is often used when the source culture concept does not exist in the target culture. The third one is challenges in translations. There are three main challenges in translations. The first one is the vocabulary gaps. When it is when there is no equivalent word in the target language. And the second one is cultural differences. It when expressions are culture specific. And there is idioms when meaning is figurative and cannot be translated literally. These challenges require both linguistic competence and cultural competence. Okay, let's move to the chapter 3. Chapter 3, Principle of Translation. Chapter 3 discusses the main principles that guide the process of translation. These principles help translators make decisions when they face difficulties in transferring meaning from one language to another. The first and most important principle is that translation prioritizes meaning over form. This means that the translator should focus on the message of the source text rather than copying its grammatical structure. Languages have different sentence patterns and ways of expressing ideas. If a translator keeps the same forms as the source language, the result may sound unnatural and unclear in the target language. Therefore, the translator must transfer the meaning while allowing the form to change when necessary. The goal is to make sure that the message is preserved even in a structure different. The second important principle is the naturalness is essential. A good translation should not sound like a translation, but it should sound like a text that was originally written in the target language. When a translation is natural, the readers can understand the text easily without realizing that it is translated from another language. Naturalness also shows that the translator has mastered the target language and understands how ideas are normally expressed in that language. The book also explains that translation must maintain a balance between the source text and the target readers. On one side, the translator must respect the source text. It means the translator should not change the meaning or intention of the original author. On the other side, the translators must consider the target readers. Different readers have different backgrounds, different levels, and also different knowledge and cultural understanding. If the translation focuses only on the source text, the translation may be accurate but difficult to understand. If the translator focuses only on the target readers, the translation may be easy to read but lose the original meaning. Therefore, translation is a process of balancing these two elements: faithfulness to the source text and clarity for the target readers. This balance is very important in producing a successful translation. Okay. In the chapter 3, the book explains the goals of translations. The first goal is accuracy. Accuracy means that the meaning of the source text is transferred correctly into the target language. There should be no distortion, omission, or addition of meaning. The translator must carefully choose words and expressions that represent the original message. Accuracy is essential because translation is a form of communication and wrong meaning can lead to misunderstanding. The second goal is readability. Readability means that the translated text is easy and comfortable to read. The sentences should flow naturally and logically. A readable translation uses appropriate vocabulary and sentence structure that match the level of the target readers. It avoids vocabulary and sentence structure that match the level of the target readers. It avoids complicated or unnatural expressions that make the text difficult to understand. Okay. So a translator must constantly decide how to express the same meaning in a different language while keeping the message accurate and readable. These chapters conclude that translation is guided by prioritizing meaning over form, ensuring naturalness, balancing source text and target readers, and achieving accuracy and readability. Move to the chapter 4. Chapter 4, Translation Technique. This chapter focuses on one important translation technique called shift and explains its definition of shift. The book explains that shifts refers to structural changes due to language differences. This means that when translating from one language to another, changes in structure are often necessary because languages do not share do not share the same grammatical system. For example, English and Indonesian have different ways of forming sentences, expressing tense, even organizing phrases. Because of these differences, a translator cannot always keep the same structure as the source text. Therefore, shift is a technique used to adjust the structure of the sentence so that the translation becomes natural and understandable in the target language. Shift, shift is not an error. Instead, it is strategy that helps the translator deal with differences between languages. In the book states that there are 5 main types of shift. The first one is level shift, structure shift, class shift, unit shift, and intra-system shift. Each type of shifts occurs for different linguistic reasons. Now let's talk about the first type of shift. There is level. Level shifts happens when meaning is expressed at a different linguistic level in the target language. For example, something expressed grammatically in one language may be expressed lexically in another language. This shows that meaning can move from grammar to vocabulary or vice versa when translated. Level shift is necessary because languages organize meaning differently. And the second one is structure shift. Structure shifts occurs when the grammatical structure of the sentence changes. For example, the position of adjective, verbs, or objects may also change. The third, class shifts. Class shifts happens when a word changes its grammatical class. For example, a noun becomes a verb, an adjective becomes a noun, or an adverb becomes an adjective. The fourth, unit shift. For example, a word may become a phrase may become a clause, or a clause may become a sentence. So it occurs when the rank or size of the language unit changes. And the last types of shifts is intrasystem. It is happen when both languages have similar system but different choices are made. For example, both languages may have singular and plural forms, but the translation uses a different form than the source text. This shows that even within similar system, translation still require adjustments. And function of shift in translation. By using shifts, the translator can respect the meaning of the source text, adapt the structure to the target language, and improve readability. Next is this chapter shows that translation techniques are not only about choosing vocabulary, but also changing structure when necessary. Shifts demonstrate that translation involves linguistic adjustment, language difference require flexibility, and accuracy depends on structural adaptations. Therefore, shift is an essential technique in professional translations. For the next chapter, will be delivered by my partner.
Okay, next chapter I will explain about translation shift.
The first point explains that different types of the text require different translation strategies. This means a translator cannot use the same method for all texts because each text has its own purpose and style. For example, translating a legal document is very different from translating a poem or a short story. The second point states that context and function strongly influences translation choice. Before translating, a translator needs to understand the situation, the goal of the text, and who the reader are. This understanding helps the translator choose words that are accurate and appropriate. The third point emphasizes the importance of understanding the genre. If the genre is not clearly understood, the translation may sound inaccurate or might not reflect the original message properly. Understanding the genre also helps maintain the tone and structure of the original text. Next chapter. In chapter 6, the discuss focus on the relationship between text and translation. First, the meaning of the text depends on its structure, purpose, and audience. So, a translator should not only translate words but also understand how the text is organized and what it's aimed to achieve. This ensures that the message is delivered clearly to the target readers. Second, translator must adjust the style and tone based on the function of the text. For example, academic texts require formal language, while casual texts allow more flexible and simple expressions. Choosing the correct tone helps the translation feels suitable for the context. Third, naturalness is essential in translation. A good translation sound smooth and natural in the target language, not stiff or not literal. When a translation sounds natural, reader can understand it more easily. Next chapter. Chapter 7 discusses about translation divi- divisions. The first part explains the form of division. These include meaning distortion with change of the original meaning of the message where important information is missing, ambiguity, which makes the message unclear, and context mismatch when the translation doesn't fit the situation. These problems can lead to misunderstanding and reduce the quality of the translation. The second part explains the causes of division. One cause is poor comprehension of the source text, where the translator doesn't fully understand the original message. Without full understanding, the translation may become inaccurate. Another cause is incorrect technique choice, meaning the translator applies the wrong method. The last cause is weak language mastery when the translator does not have strong skill in either the source or the target language. This factor can significantly affect the clarity and accuracy of the final result. Next chapters. The chapter 8 discusses about translation ideology. The first point mentioned two main ideologies, foreignization and demonstrations. Foreignization keeps the culture's element of the source text, so readers can see and understand the original cultures. This approach helps preserve the authenticity of the original text. On the other hand, domestication adapts the text to a target culture, making it more familiar and easier for readers to understand. This approach focuses on reader comfort and readability. And the last point explains the impact of ideology. The choice of ideology influences word selection and affects how culturally acceptable the translation is for the readers. In other words, the translator decision will shape how the audience understands the text. So the translation is not only about transferring language, but also about culture and the translator perspective. Okay, next slide about my friend.
Okay, chapter 9, Interpretation. According to the book, interpretation refers to oral translation. It is the process of transferring meaning directly from the search language into the target language in spoken form. What makes interpretation different from written translation is immediacy. It happens in real time. This means the interpreter must listen, understand, and speak almost simultaneously. In other words, interpretation is not just changing words, it involves fast comprehension, memory processing, and reformulation of meaning without losing the speaker's intention. Okay, on this slide, we can see two types of interpretation. First is simultaneous interpretation. Simultaneous interpretation means the interpreter translates the message at the same time as the speaker is speaking. There is almost no pause. The interpreter listens and speaks simultaneously. So we can see that this type requires very high concentration and mental coordination. Second is consecutive interpretation. Consecutive interpretation happens after the speaker finishes a sentence or part of the speech. The interpreter listens first, often takes notes, and then delivers the translation. In other words, simultaneous happens together with the speaker, while consecutive happens after the speaker pauses. The slide also shows requires skills. First, quick thinking. An interpreter must process meaning rapidly. Second, high concentration, because interpretation is real time. Losing focus can result in misunderstanding. Third, mastery of technical terms. Interpreters must understand specific vocabulary related to fields such as law, medicine, or economics. What is important here is that interpretation demands cognitive strength and linguistic competence at the same time. After understanding interpretation as oral translation, now we move to chapter 10, which discuss context and culture. Chapter 10. Yes. Chapter 10, Context and Culture in Translation. This chapter explains that translation cannot be separate from context and culture, meaning depends on situation, purpose, and cultural background. The book emphasizes that translation is not only a linguistic transfer, but also an interpretative act. A translator must understand how language functions within its social and cultural framework in order to achieve equivalence. First, context determines meaning in translation. This means that one word can have different meanings depending on situation. For example, a word in a formal setting might carry different implications than in an informal setting. So, we can see that translators must analyze the surrounding situation before choosing an equivalent term. Second, cultural difference affect equivalence. Sometimes there is no exact equivalent word because cultural realities differ. In other words, language reflects culture. If cultures differs, meaning may not match perfectly. Third, translators must understand both cultural backgrounds. Translators must understand both the source culture and the target culture. What is important here is cultural awareness. If a translator only understands language but ignores culture, the translation may sound unnatural or inappropriate. Okay, after understanding context and culture, now we move to chapter 11, which focuses specifically on cross-cultural translation. Next chapter, please. Okay, chapter 11, cross-cultural translation. This chapter discusses translation as a process of transferring meaning between different cultural systems. Because cultures differ, full equivalence is often difficult to achieve. The translator must act as a cultural mediator, making a strategic decision when cultural concepts in the source language do not exist in the target culture. Now, let us look at the slide. First, translation bridges cultural gaps. This means translation helps different societies understand each other. It connects ideas, values, and communication across cultures. Second, cultural terms might require adaptation or borrowing. Adaptation means adjusting the term to fit the target culture. Borrowing means keeping the original word from the source language. This shows that literal translation is not always possible. Third, sensitivity to cultural values prevents misunderstanding. Sensitivity to cultural values prevents misunderstanding. Translator must understand norms, beliefs, and social practice. If cultural sensitivity is ignored, translation might cause confusion or even offense. So we can see that cross-cultural translation requires cultural intelligence. We move to the final chapter, we move to chapter 12, compensation in translation. This chapter introduced compensation as a strategy to address loss of meaning in translation. When certain semantic or stylistic elements cannot be transferred directly, the translator restores the effect elsewhere in the text. Compensation helps maintain overall meaning and communicative impact. Now let us see the slide. First, compensation replaced lost meaning in another form. This means that when direct translation fails, the translator transfers the meaning differently. Second, used when direct equivalent is impossible. Some expressions in the source language simply do not exist in the target language, so the translator must apply strategy rather than literal translation. Third, maintains balance of meaning and effect. Compensation, what is important here is not only literal accuracy, but also communicative effect. The translator tries to maintain tone, emphasis, and impact. And to conclude, Chapter 11 explained the interpretation and its required skills. Chapter 10 highlights the importance of context and culture. Chapter 11 discussed cross-cultural translation strategies. Chapter 12 introduced compensation as a strategic solution when equivalent is not possible. The next chapter will be delivered by my friend. Thank you.
Okay, now I would like to explain about speed and professionalism in translation. In the world of translation, speed is important, but professionalism is even more important. A translator is not only someone who transfers words from one language to another, but also someone who carries responsibility for meaning, inquiry, and clarity. A professional translator must understand both the source language and the target language deeply, be careful in choosing words, maintain confidently, deliver the translation on time. However, working fast does not mean working carelessly. Speed must be balanced with quality. If a translator works too quickly without checking the result, the translation may lose uh, its meaning or create misunderstanding. Professionalism also include ethics. Okay, I will next the So professionalism also include ethics. Translators should not manipulate the message, change the meaning intentionally, or accept jobs outside their competence just for money. Responsibility and honest are key elements of being a professional translator. Okay, next slide. Next, I will explain about practical translation. Practical translation means applying translation theories and techniques in real situations. It is not only about knowing the theory, but about using it correctly when translating text. In practical translation, a translator must read the whole text first, understand the context, identify difficult words or expression, choose the appropriate technique such as literal translation, reduction, addition, transportation, or modulation. For example, sometimes we need borrow when there is no equivalent word, and sometimes we use reduction to avoid repetition. Sometimes we use modulation to change the point of view but keep the same meaning. So theory guides us, but practice sharps our skill. Next slide. The conclusion is translation is not simply changing words from one language to another. It it is a process of transferring meaning while maintaining a query, clarity, and naturalness. A good translator must master language concept, understand translation techniques, be aware of shifts and cultural difference, work, work professionally and ethically, and continuously improve their knowledge. There is no perfect translation, translation, but translator must try to minimize error or produce the most accurate and natural result possible. In short, translation connects knowledge, cultures, and people. Without translating, access to global information would be limited. Okay, that's all from me. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much to Group 3 for the presentation that have been delivered. Now we will continue to the question and answer session. This Q&A session will be conducted at the end and will be an open discussion. For those who would like to ask questions, please raise your hand or use the raise hand feature, mention your name and group, and deliver your question briefly and clearly. The floor is open. Is there anyone who would like to ask question? Okay, Kiki Melissa.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Ike Melissa from Group 1. So the question, how the culture difference affect the translation process?
Thank you so much, Kiki. And then Amanda.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Amanda Firamdani from Group 1. So my question is, in slide 3, it suggests that literal translation preserves accuracy. If cultural nuance is lost, can we still claim the message remains intact, or is the accuracy merely superficial? Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Is there anyone else who would like to ask question again? Okay, I think I will give this time for group 3 to discuss and answer the question.
I will answer the question from Kiki. So the answer is, how do cultural difference affect the translation process? Cultural difference strongly affect the translation process because language is closely connected to culture. What is important here is that words do not only carry meaning, they also carry cultural values, beliefs, habits, and social norms. For example, certain expressions, idioms, or cultural reference in the source language might not exist in the target culture. When this happens, the translators must decide, should I keep the original culture element, or should I adapt it to make it familiar to target readers? This is where ideology plays a role. If the translators choose foreignization, they keep the original cultural element, even if it feels unfamiliar. But if they choose domestication, they adjust the expression so it feels natural in the target culture. So we can see that cultural difference influenced first is word choice, second, sentence structure, third is style and tone, fourth, translation strategy, and fifth, ideological orientation. In other words, translation is negotiating between two cultures. Does it answer your question, Kiki? 。
Well, Kiki, does the question answer? Does the answer? Ya, itulah.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Can I answer the questions from Amanda?
Yes.
Okay, so the question is, if cultural nuance is lost, can we still claim the message remains intact, or is the accuracy narrowly superficial? So, based on the book, if cultural nuance is lost in literal translation, we cannot fully claim that the message remains intact, because true accuracy in translation is not only about preserving dictionary meaning or grammatical structure, but also about conveying cultural context, emotional tone, and communicative intention. A literal translation may be lexically correct, yet fail to deliver the same impact or implied meaning to the target audience. So, in translation theory, especially in functional and dynamic equivalence approaches, accuracy means producing a similar effect on the target readers as experienced by the source readers. Therefore, if cultural elements, connotation, or pragmatic meanings disappear, the accuracy becomes superficial rather than functional, since the deeper message is not completely transferred. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Yasmin.
You're welcome.
Okay. Is there anyone who would like to ask again? I think it is clear enough because there are anyone who want to ask again. So I will close this Q&A session. Thank you for the active participation and enthusiasm during today's discussion. Finally, we have reached the end of our session. Let us close this discussion by reciting Hamdalah together. Alhamdulillahirrabbilalamin.
Alhamdulillahirrabbilalamin.
Excuse me, moderator.
Okay.
Can we give the score for the questioner?
Yes.
I think all the question is very good, so that we decide to give an A for all the questions. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you so much. Okay, I will continue. As the moderator, I sincerely apologize if there were any mistakes or shortcomings during the discussion. Thank you very much for your attention and cooperation. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Audio Jungle.